Anderson.
Never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Get on baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
There's nobody on the planet I'd rather be talking to right now than Brian Anderson. Fact.
Such a liar already.
No, it's not. It's true. It is absolutely true. It is true. It's, and I love our conversations that we had down the field, at ballparks. And I only this past season, I only saw you in passing, which, you're a man on the go. But I sincerely mean it where, from all of our family here, you are absolutely one of, if not the favorite of all the people in the booth. And not just because you dropped baseball isn't boring one of the most exciting games I've ever saw. I think it was 2 years ago in the NLCS. So thank you for being you. I appreciate it, Brian.
Well, I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. And you seem to pop up only when I'm typically racing between manager meetings. Yeah. So this idea that I'm so busy that I don't have time for Rob is
no. I did not say that. I
I'm not that busy, really. I just act busy.
I do see you it always is interesting in case people don't understand. You get dropped in and then you meet with the manager and you and your team, not only the other broadcasters, but the producer, and they sit in on the manager's meeting, which must be such an important part of the whole deal, right? I mean, you get dropped into somewhere and you're trying to research and you're trying to read stories, but until you sit down and get the what's what from them, it must be huge, right?
That's the Kickstarter of everything that we do. So, that's kind of when you're prepping for a baseball game and you do this as well, but there's the bookwork side of it. So there's the part of it that you do before you even get to the ballpark. And that could be days in advance. It could be hours before a game. You're always just adding little nuggets here or there, things that you're reading, stats, stories, whatever. But most of it has been either discussed or presented in a way that you're now using it. So whether somebody's written about it, whether somebody's talked about it on a talk show or a podcast or whatever, those are things that have been done. So for me, I do all that work and I'm prepared to do all that. And I could easily go do a game without talking to the manager, without talking to any of the players, when I get to the ballpark. But as I always tell young baseball broadcasters, especially, the fun really starts when you show up at the ballpark. That's really the secret sauce to know how to exist in the ecosystem of this job. It is what you do on the air to get the job, but how you survive in the job is what you do when you show up and you step foot in their turf. So the manager meeting then becomes the first click to all of that. So that can open doors for players, like who's on their mind, who may be pitching tonight, what's their bullpen situation like, what's the vibe of their team, who's injured. So we really jam a lot in those 15 minutes. Most everybody is great, and we get a lot out of it. There are some managers through the years that you walk out of there with an empty notepad, and you're just like, man, that was a waste of 15 minutes. That happens occasionally. But for the most part, that manager meeting then sets off the whole chain of events that leads up to batting practice, talking to other coaches, talking to players, then our discussion together, and then from a national perspective, ultimately, going on the air, trying to represent these two teams that we are parachuting in on, that we could never know as much about as the fans who watch every game. But we're also presenting that to a national audience that knows maybe a lot or maybe nothing. We don't know.
Who's with the understanding there's a lot of good ones. Who's one that jumps out, manager that jumps out that being the most unique when you sit in these meetings? I know that, and I can rattle off guys who have great personalities. You know, a lot of them do. They just do. But for you, like, okay, hey, we get this. We're gonna go talk to this guy. It's gonna be fun. Let's go.
Yeah, I feel that way about most guys. I do. And I don't want to name the ones I don't feel that way about, but I do feel that way about most managers. I would say like Kevin Cash, Craig Counsell's always really informative. I go way back with Alex Cora. From my time as a minor league announcer, he was the shortstop on the team that I covered in San Antonio. So, and he's always really deep and gives you a lot and just kind of helps you know. He also understands the broadcasting side of things because he did it and understands what we're trying to accomplish as well. So those three guys would, Pat Murphy, obviously I'm with him all the time in Milwaukee, but boy, it's hard to contain Pat Murphy to a 15-minute interview. It's like one question and then he talks for the next 30 minutes. And he'll go through the whole roster. He'll go through the bullpen. He'll go through the injuries. He knows exactly what we're looking for. And we say, hey, Murph, how you doing? And, 20 minutes later, and Mike Vasallo, the PR guy's like, we got to go. But those are great. I really enjoy those interactions. You can always tell a lot. I do it in the NBA as well. So for me, it's a really interesting comparison and college basketball. So to take this group of college head basketball coaches, like for March Madness, to take this group of NBA coaches that I do every week, twice a week, and then to compare them to the baseball guys, it's such a different vibe.
Well, that's what I was actually going to ask you that. Yes, I was going to ask you that. Like that dynamic must be different, and even the time of the year, because I would imagine, like, say you get the March Madness and they want to play it cool, but it's one and done, or golf, or like anything. It's a baseball season, as you know, it's a long season. But then, conversely, you also have to talk to these guys at the most important time of their season, deep into the playoffs. So I don't know, like, what is the biggest difference when it comes to the sports and talking to these guys?
Well, there is no difference in that when I go into these meetings. Basically, my first question is always like, hey, what in your mind, and I don't ask it exactly this way every time, but it's the general philosophy is like, hey, in your mind, subject, coach, what is not being talked about enough from your perspective? Players, team, whatever. Because every coach, they're all alpha dogs, every one of them. And they all have these ideas of what is being said or, what is not being said. And they also know what the heartbeat of their team is. And so it kind of unlocks a lot. And I'm very curious to know how they see their team and whether they're taking on some of that outside perspective. You get into a March Madness situation, I always tell the story, like if you catch a coach for a few rounds, it is incredible how their personality changes as they begin to advance. And if you're a mid-major, the excitement level, the satisfaction as you get into a Sweet 16 and an Elite Eight, like the gorilla's off their back. But if you're expected to be a Final Four team, it's the opposite. So those early rounds, those are the tense moments. And then as they get going and they make a Final Four, then that's kind of when they relax a little bit. So I love that dynamic, and it's interesting to me. And you have to be prepared enough to go into these coaches meetings. You can't just say, tell me about your catcher. That doesn't work in this modern era of head coaches and managers. You really, not that I'm trying to tell them all the things I know, but also I want them to know that I have studied their team and I know their team, and I'm curious what things are that makes this whole thing click. So, there's a little dance in that. I think they're all the same. Ultimately, they want to get their message across, but there is a tension level that's different. When we talk to baseball managers, we're there 4 hours sometimes, 3-4 hours before a game. When we talk to NBA coaches, that's an hour and a half, sometimes an hour before tip. Like, they're game mode, they're in it. So there's a difference in the dynamic as well.
One of the things, Brian, is that I love covering baseball because of what you're just talking about. You talked about when you get to the ballpark, that's when it really starts. That's when the whole thing starts. And that's, to your point, that's 4 hours. And yes, it's a lot of standing around sometimes. But one thing that when COVID happened, that I was brought to light for me was baseball's so awesome because there are so many things that you can just pick apart and ask about. So many things. And beyond the managers' meetings, you walk into a clubhouse, you can go to anybody and ask about something. You could go out to the field at batting practice, you're standing around, someone's by the back rack, and you can talk to them. And all of it can be used, whether it's in a story, on a broadcast. And I think for baseball, that is so different. And again, it was sort of with COVID, it was, you can ask about that, but it's going to take 2 weeks to set up a Zoom call for. So that's what was taken away from us. And that's what I love about just hanging out and talking to people. And I think you did.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I tell like young broadcasters all the time, and it's been my credo since I started. And I don't know where I heard this advice. It wasn't in a sports context, but it was in just a general life context. And I've used it in my career, but it is so true every day. But if you can just replace the last 3 letters of the word interesting with 2 letters, ed, interested. So if you can be interested versus trying to be interesting, everything changes. It changes the whole dynamic of what you are doing. So when I approach any game or any sport, I'm very interested in what's happening, the whole dynamic, not just with all the main narratives that are being told, that are being discussed. We build our opens for our A, what our A list is, what our B list is, and that's all that usually is the easy part. That takes a couple of seconds even. But then what are the layers and layers we can get into? Why is this matchup? I love in baseball especially, there's always matchups, or a lot of times there's matchups or there's previous history. Guys have played together or know, like I love digging in those corners too. So if, like you said, we missed that during the pandemic because we didn't have those. We were so subject to the PR directors, media relations directors to line these up for us. And players, I don't think they mind having these discussions with us. And especially if we're asking the right questions and they enlighten us and we can know the game better and whatever, I think that's good. But their default is to avoid all of this at all cost. They don't want to talk to us ever if they don't have to. So you kind of understand that dynamic when you walk in there. So sometimes, you want to be interested in a player's career or a player's sequence, or sometimes they don't want to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to get into a hot streak or a cold streak or anything in between.
Or talk about baseball. About baseball. And
it's true.
And Brian, I don't know if I had mentioned this to you, this example, but I was sitting down with Mookie Betts, and having seen Mookie come up, it was almost every time it was, you could tell he was very nice, but when reporters get around him, you could tell he was answering the questions just to get out of there, right?
Yeah.
It was, you asked the question, I'm going to answer it next. And so when I sat down with him to ask about one of his new favorite things is podcasting, he said that it made him, for the first time in his life, actually have to listen. To listen to someone. And it made him a better person. It made him a better listener, because all of a sudden he was hosting this podcast and he had to do exactly what you're talking about, because that was not how it was ingrained in him all those years. And I'm like, good for you. Good for you. I thought it was cool. It was good.
Totally. And, you want to find the player's interest, and especially if you're looking for stories between the ball and play, those moments when the ball, I call it 2 tracks. Track 1 is when the ball's in play, the words you say, your vocabulary, the ways you describe the ball in play. And then there's track 2, and that's everything in between. And so when you're on track 2, I'm in my mind even just filling up, that would be something I could use in the middle of a play, or how to describe something. But 90% of it is things I'm filing in the track 2 file. I can use that when the ball's not in play. It's kind of template for play-by-play broadcasting that I've used and for myself, but I'm constantly like sending those nuggets that are coming at me when you engage in a player. And then if I'm not able to get anything, that's okay too. Sometimes you just don't get what you want, or maybe you didn't even know you were looking for. But if you can just meet players, like it's such an accomplishment to be where they are.
Yeah.
And we forget that sometimes. Like we as an industry, because we are in evaluation mode so often, we forget how amazing their talents are. It doesn't say anything about what kind of people they are, human beings, husbands, fathers, I don't even care about that on some level. But man, when a shortstop makes a play in the hole and throws it all the way across the diamond, and we've seen that 30 times throughout the year, sometimes we got to remember, like, that's pretty freaking amazing. Go stand there and see if you could do that. Like,
yeah, I have
so
proof.
few people could do that.
The media game is always proof of that, how difficult it is.
Right. And I think sometimes these guys have achieved such a level that I can sense body language. Sometimes guys are down, or maybe they're feeling themselves a little bit, and you try to, hey, you're feeling great, or tell me why, or hey, you're a little down, why? And I like to play a little bit of psychologist and just kind of get into their thinking, because that really, to me, is the most fascinating thing about how these players do this job, the mental warfare that this game presents, the constant back and forth. What they are in one at-bat is not what they are the next at-bat, perhaps. They're not robots. They do feel, they hurt, all that stuff. And yes, they make a lot of money, but I love the poetry of that, the art of that. And so I'm always trying to mine that out of any interaction I have. I'm there working. I'm not trying to be anybody's friend, but I'm certainly not anybody's enemy either. Just trying to be a conduit between what is happening with this player or this team or this manager, coach, whatever the subject is, and something that could be interesting for an audience, really.
And that's because it comes back to being interested. And
Yeah.
again, I don't remember if we had identified this, but I always, when it comes to that, and we talk about managers, the one guy jumps to mind. I've said this a million times about in baseball, the most interested person just happens to be a manager. You know who I'm talking about?
I mean, I could name a lot of guys, but
Okay. I don't remember if we had talked about it.
No, I don't
Corey
remember.
Lavello is one of the most interested
for
human
sure.
beings I've ever been around. And I got to imagine, so we talk about for your profession, for my profession, for a manager's profession, that for me must be such a valuable thing. And Tori, when he used to do radio hits with us, he would be asking about the equipment, about, always. So
Totally.
I
don't know him like that, but it doesn't surprise me. And I think Bobby Cox was like that. Jim Leland was like that, because the thing, Rob, and you know this, like, you can't fake that for 7.5 months, 8 months, whatever it is. If you're a manager of a team, you can't fake it. Your ego, your personality will come out eventually. And so, Bobby Cox always talked about the touch points. He wants to make a touch point with every player every day. It may not be about baseball. It may be about nothing. It may be just a hello, but he really made it a point to do that. And Ron Renicky was that way. Ron Renicky is still a guy that is probably too underrated, former Red Sox manager, as you know, but too underrated. And like, he was so interested in everything that was happening in his ecosystem. And it didn't matter. Like you're saying with Tori, I mean, the guy was like woodworking and fishing and asking about, well, how do you do this better? How do you do that better? And then the same application to each player and what made this guy tick. Oh, he's an outdoorsman. Oh, he's a city kid. Okay, and he would find these like, man, why is that important to you? Why is that interesting to you? And, he just made people feel great about themselves. He didn't smile much. He kind of did his thing. He was pretty quiet generally as a human being, but boy, he get you in a corner, and it was like you felt like you were sharing. It was a therapy session every time you talked to the guy. I know he didn't care much about broadcasting, or maybe he did. Maybe he just kind of wanted to know. Like, he would ask me, "What's your scoreboard?"
Yeah,
because he couldn't wrap his head around, like, you do this job. What makes you successful. I have a scoreboard. I have a batting average. I have an ERA. What is your scoreboard? And I had never thought about it.
What is your scoreboard?
I'm just trying to get a job. Like,
yeah, well, I guess that's
did
it,
the
right? It's getting a job and getting a job and keeping a job. But that's an interesting question. Yeah,
totally. And you can ask that to anybody in any line of work. I've asked accountants that, and I mean, I've known Ron Renicky since I was in my 20s, but I've done that. Like, okay, you show up to work every day, and you're an accountant. What's your scoreboard, and what are your successes? What are the percentages of like you resulting in that victory for your company versus your boss versus somebody under you versus an outside source? And like, you want to talk about like opening up a can? That's the best part of it. I love that part. And if you don't love that part, you can't succeed in this job. Is the ribbon on this conversation, is that if you don't really enjoy learning about people, learning about the subjects, their path, then you can't do it well, because you can't fake it in baseball, especially. You can't fake it that long.
So here's a weird segue, but I think it speaks to what we're talking about. I was just watching what the NFL is trying to do with the Pro Bowl, which is awful. So and yeah, okay, we're gonna we'll go on talk shows and say it stinks and everything else. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, well, there's smart people behind this who are trying to find the avenue to make this fit society. You were part of, during the match with the golf with Brady and Manning and those guys, and that was a good idea. I think of all the things that we were trying to do, that was a good idea, which must have been a weird thing, but a good idea. But instead of saying, well, this Pro Bowl thing is no good, I started thinking, well, we have to get to a point with baseball broadcasting and the All-Star game or whatever, and continue to try to figure out what fits this society, this attention span, this brand of player, all of this. We can't just say, oh, this stinks, be the old man yelling at clouds. No, like Pete Rose, isn't Pete Rose knocking over Ray Fosse anymore. It's not happening. We just get that out of the way. But what I'm saying is that it speaks to what we're talking about, is that when you look at baseball broadcasting and you look at the baseball events and the way the baseball is being presented, you probably the baseline, the fundamentals, but also attention spans change, everything. So you probably are asking a lot of questions about, okay, I know how I do it. I know how I was trained to do it. How can I do it to fit here? That was a very long-winded way of asking that question, but it made me think. It made me think watching this thing, because I'm just thinking there must be a reason they're trying to do this, right?
Yeah, and it's okay. Like we deal with that in the NBA. I call the NBA All-Star Game, and I've done it the last 4 years, and it's a constant maneuvering of what the game's going to be. The players don't really care. They're not really interested. They don't really give the effort. What can the NBA All-Star Game be? But, for those leagues, NFL, and I'm very glad that baseball's All-Star Game is still great. And I can't wait till they go back to their own uniforms, by the way.
Yes.
Which is that was a thing that I always hated. But, we're always trying to figure it out. We're always trying to, even if we change things, the change of it would be interesting too, and we'll see. We're inundated with so much programming, and from when the time when you and I were kids, we just didn't get to see these guys that often. Like I love the baseball bunch because it was I could know them. Like Johnny Bench was my hero, and Lasorda coming out in the Genie outfit, and it's like you kind of knew them a little bit. And now, because they're a lot of players have their own podcast, there's a lot of that out there, but they're very guarded. It's very corporate. It's hard to know what these guys are like. So our challenge as broadcasters has totally changed. We're not, I think there are, it went heavy analytics because that was a new space, and a big analytics community was on social media, so there was that constant feedback, whether you knew it or not, or could express it or not. And he's one of us. And I kind of went down that road too, where, I had to come to a reckoning with that as well, because I was I didn't want to be a know-it-all, but I also didn't want to not bring up a lot of these deeper analytics that are affecting decision making. So I wrestled with it constantly. I can remember having a ton of conversations with my colleagues, and where I landed was, in this case, just as an example, was, well, I will just quote what is important. So I will quote what David Stearns feels is important when he's evaluating, which is different than what's happening in the middle of a game. So let me just quote what a manager is thinking about when is he using exit velocity for a couple of at-bats to determine if a guy's barreling? Is he using his eyes? All of those things. Obviously, my brother's a very accomplished baseball scout with the Rangers, so we have this conversation a lot. And so, but that's an example of like, there was a window of time, and maybe still exists in some areas, where we as an industry, play-by-play broadcasters especially, were choking the game and the audience with numbers and stats and constant filling up of metrics. And it's like, even the most hardcore analytics person at some point needs a little poetry in his in his soup. I mean, it's like, so that's kind of my point. Like, we don't go. I remember having this conversation with Craig Counsell, who actually once performed in the Nutcracker. And they used to bring a celebrity on.
Yeah.
And he performed as with the dancers in the Nutcracker. He didn't go for the tights and all that, but it did spur off a conversation with Craig Counsell. Like, when we go watch the Nutcracker or a movie or whatever, but let's just say something live, like a ballet or like a dance or something like that. I'm a dance dad. My daughter grew up on dance teams. So, I didn't sit there and break down like, man, how many revolutions per second is she spinning here? I was just watching the angles, the bodies, how in sync they were. You were just like experiencing the thing. And one of the greatest moves that we've made as an industry is moving the shortstop back on the other side, which then immediately brought the artistry back for the second baseman that we lost, all these amazing second basemen through the years. So that was always a touch point for me, is like, oh, now you're seeing Bryce Terang, who's on the team I cover, like, whoa, he's special. Like, that's, we had Mike Moustakas playing second base for a couple of years. And as special as he is in other ways.
Travis Shaw.
Travis Shaw played second base. Keston Hiura. So anyway, my point is like, okay, there's probably a little bit of both. And if we're going to talk about analytics and why decisions are made and why this guy's on the roster in the lineup in this position, my kind, should be quoting those reasons why, not owning those reasons why. I don't know. Every ball club is different. I don't know exactly why a certain player would go here, but I can go ask, and I can say, after a conversation with X, this is why they feel like Ohtani should be hitting leadoff. So those are then really interesting conversations to spin off into your analyst, and especially if your analysts are coming from, in my case, I work with Ron Darling from a different age. Jeff Francoeur is more of a modern player. So to me, again, it's all of our game, and we all enjoy the game in different ways. So finding that sweet spot, it's not all one way though. You have to hit on all those little vines off that stem. You can't just say, I'm just going to be an analytics guy and I'm going to do analytics.
Yeah.
Or the other way. I'm just going to be like whimsical and, hey, that was beautiful. Wow, this is amazing. You can't do that either.
No, and I think that it's a very real challenge. First of all, like, I remember it didn't seem that long ago, I would hesitate even putting OPS in a story because, like, now I'm gonna have to take a paragraph to explain what OPS is, right? And it's obviously taken a level up from then, but we're getting a lot of broadcasts, off broadcast to fill those voids, to play to the specific, instead of saying, well, we could have a broadcast, to your point, that has all of it. We just have to maneuver it. Well, But no. This have the Manning cast, or people are doing offshoots of the Manning cast, right? Well, we're gonna have guys sit on the couch and talk, or we're gonna have the analytics only broadcast, or we're gonna have the Nickelodeon broadcast. That may be a bad example because that's for a different demographic, but and I don't know. I still think, this is my opinion, I still think the best is the broadcast that you do, because as long as you have an acceptance of all the things you just said, you can do it. I feel the others, there's too many holes in them, especially baseball. There's too much. We can goof around for 10 minutes, but okay, now you got 40 minutes till something else happens, till we goof around again. So anyway.
It's a real, and we have a responsibility. And what I will say, the thing that gets left off these conversations a lot, and it's really one of the most important areas that we are missing as an industry, is we are not developing the behind the scenes personnel. So in baseball, the director is one of the most important people to the presentation of a game. And the great directors, the artists, who can do that, who know the game and can cut cameras and create pace with their cuts. A producer who understands the kind of replays, or a replay sequence that will start off. For me, I always ask for like the grip in a slow-mo, because the grip of a pitch prior to him letting it go can reveal a lot. What pitch it was, the tension in his fingers, his hands, how it's coming off his hand, all of that stuff can then set it off. So, but we are, as the regional sports network model is dying on some level. The ratings are very popular for baseball in the local markets. But there's a model that's not working, and whether these RSNs survive or not is to be determined. A lot of teams are taking over their broadcasting, but the one thing we're not doing is we're not creating this bed of individuals, especially in the director chair. It's hard to find a baseball TV director under the age of 40 right now. Almost impossible.
Wow.
There are a few, but not many. On one hand, you can count them. And I'm not saying that you have to be younger. I'm saying as time goes on and these directors start to age and move into bigger jobs as their experience level goes, the well is getting pretty dry. And I've been shouting it at the hilltops to like, man, we need to take a look at this as an industry. We need great graphics people. We need great producers, directors, camera operators. And Rob, my background. So like, I'm very tuned as a former handheld camera operator to the technical side of this. And we have some amazing technicians who run cameras and run audio and run videotape, but there's nobody coming up. Like I teach a class at Marquette every year, and very few students want to get into the production side of things. Number one, it's hard to make a living doing that. Number two, it's like you're traveling. It's not, we're beating them down, that group of people, and we need to create some fertile ground for them. When I started as a cameraman, that was like, man, I'm running handheld camera, and there's Michael Jordan. I'm like covering Michael Jordan in my viewfinder. And I'm choosing whether I want to go head to toe, waist up, zoom in for a close-up. It's like I'm getting to choose all that. I'm getting to create through the lens of my camera, and was given the freedom to and the training to go create. And now everybody's in survival mode doing multiple jobs just because we're thinning down what our broadcast can be, because we're trying to do it cheaper, faster. And there's so many young people who probably don't even know there's this whole industry that you could pursue, that you could be in the moment. Like when I work these national games for TBS or in the NBA with TNT, I always say, like, our camera operators, they're amazing. Just watch them. Watch our handheld guy. When Emmanuel Clase is running out of the bullpen.
Oh, I love watching
game.
Those. Yeah.
So you love the shot.
Yeah.
Do you know how fast Alex had to sprint to get to that place during a commercial, get in place, get through the door, get the camera framed while he's breathing. It's an athletic endeavor. And I'm not saying all of it's like that, but it's all this setup and then walking him out with his back, the stadium. Like, these are the shots we remember. And I'm just so worried that, no, I didn't mean to take this on another tangent.
No, but you got me
so worried about it because baseball, Rob, is so hard to televise. The NBA, the NHL, pretty easy. Football, these are sports when the ball goes back and forth and there's not a lot of nuance. I mean, there is, but there's not like baseball. Baseball is just, it's so much more than that. And if we want to present the game in a great way, we need to have like more for young people who want to get involved. And I sound like an old man now, but young people, we need to create a fertile ground for them. I really believe it with all. I'm telling you, man, we're going to look back in 10 years and we're going to have this major shortage of individuals who have the skill to like follow a baseball. You know, we have camera guys here in Milwaukee. They're legendary. They can focus on the ball on the pitch. He's in center field, okay? Now I want to take you through a whole sequence. His name's Dwayne Rodriguez. He's as good as it gets. He can focus on the grip of the pitch, okay? He can then use his lens to zoom in. He's in center field behind the pitcher, capture the frame, pitcher, batter, umpire, okay? He's got that. In focus now. You got to move your focus when you do that. Mm-hmm. He can then take a throw to second base from a catcher, be in focus and frame the whole time. He can take the runner down the first base line, safe or out, bang, bang, play. If it's a ground ball to short and bang, bang, play. He can score guys. He can do all of this stuff. And I'm like looking at Dwayne going, I don't think anybody I know who's 25 years old is ever going to be able to do that. And then what are we left with? You know,
and first of all, you got me fired up. Thank you. But no, seriously. And so I'm thinking through it. The one I was going to ask you, talk in my amateur psychologist view on why there isn't younger people doing this. And real short, because I want to get to my second point. Real short, I think a lot of it is because the creativity that you talked about is now their creativity is on Instagram and on TikTok, and that's sure. Their path.
Oh, they're there. The skill level's there,
right? But
we're not inviting them in.
But that'll help promote a broadcast, but it's not going to execute a broadcast.
Correct.
But as you're talking, we have said a bunch of times on this podcast about how baseball is the best sporting event to go to. It just is. And Manfred in the book that we did said that, and I agree with him 100% for a bunch of reasons. But think about it from a broadcast perspective. In those moments that you broadcast in the playoff games, in the championship, in the deepest, the most important games, there is not another sport where you have the drama of the crowd, of the faces, of the holding the baseball, of the anticipation, even with the pitch clock, the anticipation of what is going to happen, and then back to the crowd and the nail biting and all of that, and then the eruption of it. Think about it. There's not that in any other sport, because everything else is boom, 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 and that's fine. But I'm just stating a fact. In those moments, there is no better TV in all of sports than the most important moments of a baseball season. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and then it starts over. So it may just end in a foul ball. All of that you just said. So we start the whole process over again. And so, and again, not to continue to throw this back on production, but I would say that if you're in our world now where we're moving, if we're cutting cameras and cutting personnel and cutting tape machines down, then we're losing angles, then we're losing the breadth of, we do a playoff game, we have 25 cameras and 12 tape machines, but on a local game, maybe we're 8 and 4. And so, and maybe we're trying to do a spring training game with 4 cameras and 1 tape machine. So there's a difference, and I love the art of television. Not necessarily like I've always considered myself a radio play-by-play announcer first. That's how I started. I did it for 9 years. I'm associated as a television announcer. But man, the true art of broadcasting is baseball on the radio. And I miss it. Like I did it for 140 games a year in the minor leagues for 9 years. I couldn't get out of the minor leagues. But I did it, and I do miss that. But then when I got over to television, I started to realize what a beautiful, obviously baseball is a beautiful sport, and all sports can be. They are, and they're shot so well. And the way the NFL is shot and covered that's why the NFL is like it is. I mean, you think about what kind of spurred this movement into the NFL, and it was NFL films and these real like hardcore videographers, and they were shooting the Mercury Morris running at you in focus for 80 yards. That's almost an impossible shot.
No, it's great. I mean, you put what do you do with the drunken sailor music behind it? It's like, let's go.
So I think, I would love to see more of that. And we have a lot of conversations about how our game, and yes, social media has a great purpose, influence. Shows like yours, man, these are really important pieces of our game. There's so many, we have a voice, and there's so many layers of the game and we can talk about, but we should also continue to innovate and continue to think about ways how we can present the game differently or better or clearer. Or I can remember the first time we had the Phantom Cam, 15 years ago, and we saw Hunter Pence foul a ball off and hit the ball twice because his bat broke. Like, I didn't even know that existed. All the years we've been watching baseball, did we know that you actually make contact with the ball twice when a bat breaks sometimes? It's like, whoa, that's kind of cool. And the splintering of the bat. So in our TBS world, we try to always do the extra layers of what you're talking about. Not just the game itself, but the reactions or the vibrations or the chalk going on the field, or heck, some of my favorite things on the MLB app. I know you know where I'm going with this, but if you're watching a game on the MLB app and when the regular television goes to commercial and they just run like slow motion of guys watering the field. Yeah. I love that. It's mesmerizing to me. And the sounds, I could sit there and just watch that and like, oh man, look at that. They're chalking the field. And there's not a lot of time to do that during a game, but if we can subtly throw that in.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, but I do know we are in a little bit of a danger zone here. And I don't feel like it's being recognized enough because sales are good, because viewership is good. But I would really like to start addressing building this roster, this bench of the next generation who are going to take over this game. And they'll find their way, I'm sure. But I would just, the game's so beautiful. And if we're going to miss what the beauty of the game is, because we don't have people who are trained and skilled, they have the skill set. They can do it. We, probably us older guys especially, haven't really created an open door to do that or realize how special it is. Even the mixing of a game, the audio mix, like what I love about our crew in Milwaukee, and we talk about this all the time. They're probably sick of me because we talk about these things, but when we show a reliever in the bullpen, our audio guy has done the work to run a cable all the way out there from the patch panel, put a microphone in each bullpen for the 20 times a game, at max, 10 times at minimum, when he's popping that mixer up, when you see the reliever and you hear the
it's basically, it's saying that sound is saying, okay, there's a fork in the road coming in this game. Like that singular sound.
Yeah. And it's because the game's going on. It's not a sound you associate with actually like the play that's happening in the actual game between the lines, but there's a whole ecosystem going on the other side. Like there's a guy with a clicker, the bullpen coach, there's a pitcher warming up, there's a catcher, who's So I love that stuff. And so I'm always like we putting microphones in the walls. And for us as play-by-play announcers to be able to know that I know our audio guy has put a microphone in that wall. He's done the work. So when I see a guy going at the wall, I can say, and he's back, and I can lay out and hear him thud that wall as opposed to talking over it. Those are the things that like really geek me out. So maybe we should start a new podcast called Broadcasting Isn't Boring.
Oh, listen, I'm all for it. We're all for offshoots. Listen.
Sorry, I went totally nerdville there.
This is
but
again,
it's really important to me, and I just want to see that addressed on some level, and I hope it will. I shout it as loud as I can from every time I can.
Honestly, Brian, like when it comes to broadcasting, that's one thing that I probably can talk about or like to talk about more than most things. But there's so many things in baseball, a lot of times you don't get a chance to do it. So I really appreciate it. And you've been very generous for the time. The last thing is, obviously there's a ton of things I can ask you about Bob Uecker, but I want, in this spirit of learning things, I will just ask this. What did you learn from Bob Uecker?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but because I'm not near that level of fame, but I did learn how to be a public figure. We never really talked broadcasting. We didn't talk mechanics. Now, we would talk how to exist in the world of baseball or with a team, but we never sat down and talked about like play-by-play. So I had those conversations with Vin Scully or even Ernie Harwell, two guys that I looked up to and would ask a lot of when I was a younger broadcaster, and Jack Buck and Marty Brenneman. So that was always a different relationship. Bob Costas, Hal Michaels, we would talk Dick Stockton, hardcore broadcasting. Like I'm just throwing the biggest names I can think of that I've come in contact with. Never had that with Bob. He never even saw himself as a broadcaster, really. I mean, he did and he was, but he was a player. He was just a player doing this broadcasting thing, and he was great at it. But then to watch how he navigated, this incredible fame and how great he was with the fans, but he was also firm with some people, especially like the guys selling autographs, trying to get autographs and waiting for the bus or waiting at the ballpark, and their job was to get a signature and go sell it. And I think he always knew. I'm like, how do you know these guys? And he always kind of had that sense. And to watch him do things that maybe weren't even publicized, or he was always really adamant with us about not talking about, which we can share now. But his work with the Make-A-Wish, and I don't want to just turn this into like a eulogy, but he just did a lot of things like that. And he could be salty. And he'd get his dander up, and even at me at times, and all of us, we felt the wrath. All of us did. But then again, it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like why he would feel that way and feel strongly about that. He protected radio a great deal. He did not like radio guys and TV guys switching sides, like meaning during a game, a radio guy would come over and do TV. Now, he would come over and do TV with us every now and then, but he didn't like that. He loved to protect the sanctity of the radio. And, that meant I was a little bit of an outsider, and all of us who worked there in his world. But, we spent a lot of time on the buses, and he could diffuse any situation. He could also like agitate any situation. He read people beautifully. So yeah, that would be the laundry list of things that I learned from him.
Yeah.
We'll really never be able to imitate, but there are times when, I feel like he tuned my radar to be present in moments and like be aware of every situation, whether that's a little bit of the, there's a little bit of fear involved, meaning like this person could be dangerous for you in this setting, walking back from a ballpark, dark alley, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But also like, hey, this is probably a person that you could lean into, and I don't pretend to know that like he did, but I did observe him for 18 years. and I watched him execute a lot of these things without thinking and just constantly living his life as a very famous person who was really great at what he did, and what he was defined as to a national audience was totally different than what he is defined as to a Brewer fan, because he was just a radio play-by-play guy who kind of made it big elsewhere. But, the nuts and bolts of what he was he called a beautiful game every day for 54 years. I mean, what a legacy, man. I was honored to know him the way I did.
Well, it's a great answer and appreciated one too. And I appreciate everything that you do. And every time I talk to you, like I said, I get fired up, man. Like I just know that the last time we talked, last time you're on the podcast, I went to my alma mater right after Springfield College, and the minute I walked in the door, the professor said, "I heard that podcast that you did with Brian Anderson," and I made sure that every single kid in this class listened to it. And I would suspect that that's going to be the case with this one too. But it's all stuff, because it's not just here's a list of things. It's conversations. We're having a conversation. I learned a bunch off this conversation, and also I was entertained by this conversation. So I just appreciate it, man. I appreciate it, and just stay well. And I know that you're going to parts unknown, or not parts known, but parts all over the place. It's a busy time for you before you get to the baseball season.
Yeah, it's good busy. It's a great thing, and I'm thankful for our relationship, and always enjoy being with you. And when I saw the name of your podcast, I'm like, man, you know how many times I've said that to people that I've known for 30 years when people don't really know baseball. So it was like it struck a chord, and yeah, we'll always be connected, Rob, and I'm happy to do this anytime. And when we want to get into like J school, when we debut, our broadcasting isn't boring, then let's go. I'm ready for you. Anytime.
Hey, we'll start with the t-shirts, and then we'll go from there.
That's right. Sounds good. Always great to be with you.
I too.